we begin waiting for the Kremlin. Russia says it is waiting to hear from U.S. officials about details of a proposed 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that if Moscow refuses Washington's ceasefire proposal, the U.S. will conclude that Russia is the real impediment to peace. Kyiv has already backed Washington's plan as the Trump government reverses course on Ukraine yet again, restarting military aid with Kyiv a week after halting it.
A 30-day ceasefire. That's what American and Ukrainian leaders are proposing after Tuesday's talks in Saudi Arabia. Now Moscow must agree too for a truce to become reality.
Ukraine, ceasefire, just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. If we can get Russia to do it, that'll be great. If we can't, we just keep going on and people are going to get killed, lots of people.
The Kremlin is refusing to comment on the plan until it hears directly from the US and knows all the details. People in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, have little faith that the proposal will bring any peace to their country. I'm not sure if we can cut a deal with Putin. Even if there's a ceasefire now, I'm sure that he will come back and attack us again in the future.
Putin is not ready for a ceasefire. Ukraine will get more help when the Americans understand that. Trump wants to get a ceasefire, a peace deal at any cost, so he can call himself a peacemaker. He doesn't care about the terms. If we have to give up land or not, or what happens to the people here, he just doesn't care.
Ukraine's cities have continued to come under constant bombardment, even while a ceasefire is being discussed. A Russian drone hit the northeastern city of Sumy on Tuesday night, sparking this fire. And on Wednesday morning, residents of Kryvyi Rih woke up to a series of explosions.
Well, for more now, I'm joined by Bradley Bowman. He's Senior Director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, where he focuses on U.S. defense strategy and policy. Brad, it's good to see you again. The UK's Prime Minister has called Ukraine's support of a 30-day ceasefire an important moment for peace in Ukraine. Do you agree?
Thanks for the opportunity to join you again. I think a 30-day ceasefire would at least stop temporarily the extraordinary suffering of the brave Ukrainian people who've been defending themselves. But we should have no illusions. Putin will use any ceasefire as an opportunity to solidify his stranglehold of territory stolen from Ukraine and to replenish and restore and ready his Russian forces for future aggression. And that's why I think it's really so important for the United States and our European allies to use any potential ceasefire to get Ukraine the weapons, munitions, and battlefield intelligence it needs, because we know that once ceasefires are often temporary, when they end, the results of the subsequent fighting is often based on what is done in relative terms during the ceasefire. And by the way, I'll add this. Any commitment from the Kremlin is not worth the paper it's written on. The only consistent thing we see from Moscow is a cynical disregard for the previous commitments. And if you don't believe me, look at the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let me pick up on what you were talking about, what can be done during a ceasefire. I mean, what do you think realistically can be achieved if we're looking at 30 days of no fighting?
30 days is, I take your implicit point, is not a long time, but we saw the Trump administration suspend weapons deliveries and the provision of battlefield intelligence. That was a horrible mistake that punished the invaded and helped the invader. And so I'm really glad that that has ended. So we can start to have weapons, American weapons, flowing again to Ukraine and the provision of intelligence. And that will make life harder for the invaders and help the Ukrainians. And so I think that's very positive. But the bottom line is Europe has received a wake-up call, not the way I would have wanted it, but it's a wake-up call. And they really need to get busy on defense spending, their defense industrial base, and building their arsenals so that they can pick up the slack if the United States doesn't see its own interests clearly and proceeds with some of these Trump administration policies.
Yeah, speaking of U.S. interests, let me ask you about what the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said yesterday. He said that the ball is now in Russia's court when it comes to peace and end to this war. Hasn't it always been in Russia's court?
Yes. When your neighbor is enduring a home invasion, you help the homeowner and you oppose the home invader. And if you don't, you get more home invasions. I mean, some of this is complicated, some of it's not. That's not. So let's see what Putin says, and more importantly, what he does. But here's my warning to Europeans and Americans. Whatever we see in the short term, we should not be confused or deceived. Putin is not done with Ukraine, and he's not done with Europe.
You know, Europeans are looking, though, at U.S. policy, and that they're seeing kind of a whiplash effect here when it comes to U.S. policy on Ukraine. I mean, do you know how to read the Trump administration's stance on Ukraine?
You know, I don't have a degree in psychology, so I'm not going to try to get into President Trump's mind. But I would say that, you know, when in doubt, look at what he's saying. He's saying he wants the war to end. I agree. The suffering has been horrific because of this war of choice that Vladimir Putin started. Let there be no confusion on that. But history tells us how the fighting stop matters and helps determine whether we have more fighting in the future. And we need to understand that if we lock in the status quo, Putin's going to see that as some form of a modest victory and validation that aggression pays, and he will be back for more, and he will use the ceasefire to replenish his forces and get ready for more, and also work more closely with the Iranians and the Chinese. So this is not over, and Americans and Europeans need to understand that regardless of what happens in the next few days.
And Brad, before we run out of time, what do you see as the best way, the best prospect for pressuring Vladimir Putin into peace? Is that possible?
I think the best prospect is to stop making preemptive concessions. I mean, we've basically, whatever the motive, has been going down and clicking off one by one Vladimir Putin's wish list. No NATO membership for Ukraine. What a mistake to offer that preemptively. No Article 5 coverage for European peacekeepers. It just goes on and on and on. So I'd say stop hurting the homeowner and start focusing on pressuring and coercing the home invader. Let's start there.
Okay, Bradley Bowman, as always, Brad, we appreciate your time and your very clear insights into this. Thank you.
Thank you.
For more, let's bring in Marina Miron here. She's with King's College London and joins us from Munich. Marina, what do you see as the key components that need to be included in any ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine?
Good day. Well, that is a very good question because right now we don't really know what details have been discussed with the Ukrainian side yesterday in Jeddah, meaning that, for one, where will the ceasefire line be? So that will be the first component, the important component to include. And both sides will have to agree on it so that both sides can respect it. And then who is going to monitor the ceasefire line? Because the Russians will be pushing for a neutral party, most likely, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has voiced his opinion regarding European peacekeepers on Ukrainian territory. Then we also need to think about how many troops would be required in order to monitor such ceasefire. What would happen in a case of violation of a ceasefire? What kind of punishment will there be, or deterrent? And is this deterrent credible? Is this deterrent available? Who is going to execute it? So who is going to be the arbiter in this whole situation? And of course, who's got the money to pay for all this? Because ceasefires are expensive. You have to sustain troops. We have to keep in mind that even if we accept the current line of contact as a potential ceasefire line, it's over 1,000 kilometers. You will have to reach a certain troop density and sustain troops there. So you need logistics, you need the manpower, and so on and so forth. So it is quite complicated. It's not as easy as we just stop shooting and that's about it.
Those are huge questions you've raised. They're all very relevant. Ukraine has already signed up to it, apparently, conditional. It signed up to the ceasefire agreement, assuming that Russia also goes along with it. What do you make of Trump lifting the U.S. freeze on military aid and intelligence sharing with Ukraine now that they've gone along with it?
I think it was a way for Trump to demonstrate who has the cards. If we recall the encounter in the Oval Office between President Zelensky and President Trump. And so for the Trump administration, it was very important to demonstrate that Ukraine has lost its power to dictate what it wants, meaning that it is fully dependent to a great extent on the United States. The European countries don't have those same capabilities that they could offer to Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine should do as essentially the US administration suggests. And if it doesn't, then, well, too bad, so sad for Ukraine, then you won't get any aid. And let's see what you do. And this is exactly the kind of the reasoning behind what the Trump administration did. Let's turn this off. Let's pause it and see what happens and see how quickly they come back and say, we would still like to take that offers that you made in the Oval Office. And we have seen in Jeddah, for instance, President Zelensky wasn't part of those negotiations. It was his advisor, Andriy Yermak. It was the head of the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada and as a defense minister. So it seems also a little bit like the Trump administration is trying to push out Zelensky as well when it comes to moving forward and repairing relations with Ukraine.
Which side in this war, Marina, do you think would benefit most from a 30-day ceasefire? And how would you expect Ukraine and Russia to use that time, knowing that the fighting might resume?
Well, we cannot say that because each side says that the other side is going to benefit. Usually it depends on how each side spends these 30 days. Are they going to regroup, recover, and prepare for war? Or are they just going to stop and hope that the ceasefire will be extended? So we don't really know, and we don't know. And I think this is one of the points that the Russians will try to push for, is that prevent Ukraine from receiving more aid, more military aid during the time of ceasefire. And of course, the Ukrainian side will want the same for Russia not to rearm, but I don't think that European countries have a lot of leverage on that because unlike Ukraine, Russia doesn't have those dependencies. And so potentially both sides could benefit from it by rearming. Right now, at least from the Russian side, there are voices that are saying they are being tricked into another Minsk, and that because they're winning on the battlefield, the ceasefire is going to be enacted now or is being proposed to be enacted now. The Ukrainian side is saying that it's benefiting the Russians. They have no choice, but either way, as I said, it's difficult to foresee which side will benefit the most, and the positions are diametrically opposed. But that will depend on what other actors do, what Ukraine does, what the United States does, what Europe does, and of course what Russia does, if it is going to be signed. And the question is if and when, under what conditions, and in what shape, because I'm sure that the Russians will push for their own conditions and some sort of guarantees to ensure that there is no rearmament of Ukraine during this time.
Marina, thank you very much for your analysis. That was Marina Miron from King's College London.
Thank you for having me.